The poem Digging by Seamus Heaney is taken from his anthology Death of a Naturalist, which was his very first published anthology of poetry. In this anthology, Heaney reflects upon childhood memories and experiences set against the backdrop of his rural Irish upbringing. The poem Digging focuses on Heaney considering his lineage and his own role in his family. He reconciles his poetic vocation with the traditional rural activities of Ireland. The form of this poem is 8 stanzas of varied lengths, and it is free verse with 31 lines. The organic and natural structure imitates the content. The randomness of the lines per stanza represent the randomness of memory and the unevenness of physically digging in the peat. The chopped lines are like the chopped grass on which his father and grandfather work. The tone of this poem is emphatic and reflective. The heavily stressed monosyllables create a masculine energy, are terse, and reflect the character of Irish farmers who were country people whose actions spoke louder than their words. The rhythm of this poem is varied, and there are odd rhyming couplets and some internal rhyme. The rhythm is reflective of the rhythm of digging itself, and the rhyme in the beginning is a stereotype of how poetry is always supposed to rhyme. However, towards the end, the poem shifts more into free verse, which is more harsh, like farming, and also shows the connection between rural Heaney's family and his own interest in poetry. The title of the poem, Digging, is a verb in the present tense and takes us right into the action. When the reader reads this for the first time, they may think that it's related to farms, perhaps it's related to digging a grave. However, after reading the poem, the word digging becomes a metaphor for writing. It is a metaphor for art, and it's a means of identification. The first line in the poem, between my finger and my thumb, the squat pen rests, is repeated at the very end. It's also the last stanza. This has a cyclical quality. However, in the beginning, this idea of the squat pen resting in his hands like as a gun is negative. The squat word used is passive and links an uncomfortable pen to a comfortable gun. And the use of the word gun is violent, so the narrator is comfortable with the pen as though the pen is a weapon, and also maybe reflective of the Irish wartime that the poem was written during. Use of the word squat also shows it to be small and insignificant because it's not a spade, it's not what his parents and his grandfather uses. The second line is under my window, a clean rasping sound. The word clean is positive, however the word rasping is negative. This is not the first time that this contrast between positive and negative sounds are used in the poem, or it is the first time, but it's used multiple times later on. And it shows the confusion that Heaney is having during the time that he's writing this poem, as he's uncertain as to his own role in his family, whether what he's doing is worthwhile or not. Then it says, the spade sinks into the gravelly ground. The repetition of the S sound, spade sinks, is smooth and conveys that, and the repetition of the GR sound is onomatopoeic and adds to the gravelly nature of Heaney's own confusion with what his life goals are. Then we have my father, comma, digging, period, I look down, and the triad adds emphasis to this, as this is the first shift from Heaney's life to Heaney's father's life. There's also the fact that I look down and then there's a white space into the next stanza, which perhaps is reflective of Heaney actually looking down at his father, literally as well as figuratively, because unlike his father, Heaney received an education, so perhaps he sees himself as superior to his father with his educational background. Then there's the word straining rump among the flower beds, which is an aggressive way of describing his own father. However, it's also affectionate and intimate. It shows that he has a good relationship with his father. And then Benslow comes up 20 years away, which moves 20 years into the past. The poem shifts into the past as his father stooped in rhythm through potato drills, the repetitive action, where he was digging. There's a white space here, and the white spaces throughout this poem between the stanzas are reflective of Heaney's advancing in understanding. Then the words coarse Nestled on the lug again is contrasting the positive and negative diction. Coarse is of course rather negative, and nestled is positive, like cuddling. It's a contrast of elegance with the inelegant. And then it happens again with cool hardness, where cool is a positive, but hardness is rather negative. Then lines 15 and 16 show reverence, and it's 2 lines in the middle of the poem, so this is emphasis of the shift from father to grandfather, where just like his old man. And so then this is the longest stanzas from line 17 to 24, and it's about his grandfather, and because there is the longest amount of lines in this stanza, it suggests that he has a lot of admiration for his grandfather, because he gets the most attention. This section of the poem has a childlike voice. My grandfather cut more turf in the day than any other man on Toner's bog, which suggests that it's Heeny's own childhood self talking about this portion of the poem. There's a contrast between Heaney, who was sloppy and a mess as a child, as opposed to his grandfather, who had precise action. This is emphasized with the word sloppily, which has a fluidity to the word, and then the internal rhyme of nicking and slicing neatly, heaving sods over his shoulder. The enjambment between heaving sods over his shoulder also reflects literally heaving the sods over his shoulder. Looking for the good turf, where he's digging. This, of course, can be mapped to Heaney himself looking for the good content with his type of digging, which is writing poetry. This section of the poem also reflects life in a bygone era, because Heaney and people like him no longer live the way his grandfather could. This takes us into the second to last stanza, which is the most negative stanza in the poem. There's a lot of negative diction, such as squelch and slap and soggy, and there's that sharp S sound, which adds to the negativity of the whole thing. The alliteration and curt cuts slice through your own mind as you're reading them. And there's a living roots awaken in my head. And that's a metaphor for his familial roots. But then he says regretfully, but I've no spade to follow men like him. Men like them. However, then there is the white space again, where he begins to understand that it's okay that he is not like his father and grandfather, because between his finger and his thumb, his squat pen rests. This is the same pen now, but there's new meaning, because he can dig with it. So in reality, he does not have to dig literally, but he can dig metaphorically to follow in his father and grandfather's footsteps, but in a different way. So there's resolution at this end. The I'll dig with it is the last line. It's monosyllabic. There's a sense of reconciliation of this dilemma that he's had through this whole time. He is fulfilled now with his spade, which is his pen.